29 days after the sinking of the Titanic, on April 15, 1912, Dorothy Gibson starred in the first theatrical retelling of the disaster, titled Saved from the Titanic. Dorothy Gibson was a rising star in the growing age of the silent film era. She was also a survivor of the sinking, traveling alongside her mother after being called to start work on a series of films in the United States. Little did she know, she'd be depicting herself on a night that would change her life and the world forever. As time and circumstance would have it, only stills are available of this precious piece of early cinema. Just 2 months later, the Continental Kunstfilm Company of Berlin released an even longer depiction on August 17, 1912, called, in English, In Night and Ice, or In Nacht und Eis. The movie is an impressive 45 minutes long and separated into 3 canisters, compared to the average 10-minute picture shot on one reel. It was met with good reviews by critics for not sensationalizing the disaster, its use of filters for day and night, and for its emphasis on heroism, though its release late into the film season didn't help draw a lot of public exposure. While my modern eyes grew tired of some of the long singular shot scenes, I was impressed and charmed by the production quality, especially considering its contribution to the beginning stages of the film industry. While some of the film was shot on a soundstage, the ship that is clearly not Titanic was in actuality Hapag-Line's Kaiserin Augusta Victoria, which sailed from 1906 to 1930, though one scene features what might be the Kaiser Wilhelm der Große. For a completely different ship and culture depicting the ship and the people involved, it was a real treat for me to see authentic 1912 in a picture about 1912. Though I don't think some of the passenger pastimes played any part aboard the very British White Star liner. This gem has been beautifully restored in HD, and for anyone interested, I have linked it in the description below. Hello, my name is Matthew. I'm a combined megaship history enthusiast, and on this channel I live to bring the golden age of ocean travel back to life in interactive and immersive ways. This is the first video in a series I'm calling Great Ships of Cinema. In Great Ships of Cinema, I review movies and various forms of media that feature the great ships of the sea, many we know and love. My criteria for these reviews include how the ship or ships or the subject matter of ships are represented, how they aid the story and the characters, whether providing a catalyst or becoming characters themselves, the impact the piece of media served to the public and society at the time and throughout time, the reason behind the choices made, and in many instances, lost insight into shipboard life that can help bring us closer to the shipboard experience, as well as a review of the movie overall. Also, it would warm me heart so for you to press the subscribe button, as I plan on posting many more videos like this. I'm trying to get to 1,000 subscribers, and your support would be so very much appreciated. Press the like button as well if you enjoy any part of this video. As a way of honoring the Titanic on the 110th anniversary of the sinking, the year, not so much the month, I wanted to revisit how media has represented the ship and the disaster throughout history. This isn't so much a shot-by-shot comparison, there are videos out there for that, as much as it is a look into how different time periods present and interpret the ship, the time, the people, and the disaster itself. There are so many movies and TV shows about the disaster that, in the same vein as Be Kind Rewind, I'm going to narrow it down to a small handful of movies that have made a big impact on audiences, though I will give all the honorable mentions that I can. So, yeah. From the very beginning, the mysterious and highly provocative curiosity of the Titanic disaster has been both exploited and creatively depicted, for better and for worse. Every generation of storyteller and camera aficionado alike have depicted the extensively investigated night in very similar and yet very uniquely different ways. If you want to adapt a hollowed and sensitive event into historical fiction, there are certain factors you cannot avoid if you want to do it right. Unless you have an agenda or some very wild ideas. While in my intermediate levels of film academia, one movie we viewed in class really struck me, and that was the 2013 biopic Philomena. It's about an Irish teenager who gets pregnant out of wedlock and journeys years later to find the son she was forced to give up. This was based on a true story, and I thought it was done very well. I felt like I was immersed into a time and place so long ago that I could not have otherwise experienced. Funny enough, the real Philomena didn't seem to have any complaints about the facts, but she did have some things to say about the atmosphere, the new-aged humor, the way her time was represented.
And did you know Steve's work before?
I did, yes.
Oh, Jane did,
Yes,
yeah. And my son was very...
Alan Partridge was more a part of your life.
Oh.
Much more so, yeah.
It's more for the younger people,
It's probably
I
a
think.
So have you
generation
tried to
thing.
watch Alan Partridge since all
I
this?
have, of course I have, yeah.
Not your cup of tea.
Yeah, I've watched him, you know.
Is it your cup of tea?
Oh, my cup of tea. I prefer the older type comedy,
Yeah.
you know. The black and white movies and all that sort of thing, the older comedy. But there again,
you
I
been
watched
served?
him. It was not quite my cup of tea, you know, but it's for the younger people, you know.
History and the tropes of storytelling, the perspective of the storyteller, and the camera all have a unique relationship.
And there are, of course, things that aren't in your personal repertoire that you have to somehow understand through reading and through watching other things and through hearing other people talk about them, so that everything is related, I suppose. But then, having said that, that's not my story. I have to then relate it back through Philomena. I mean, it's quite a tangled kind of piece of string that touches all sorts of parts. Well, as I've said before, it's the responsibility you feel to somebody. I mean, I felt quite a responsibility when I played Elizabeth I, but nobody here remembers her. And then I felt a responsibility when I played Victoria, but not many people remember her. And then I felt a huge responsibility when I played Iris, because a lot of people remember her. And so now I have Philomena, who was, you know, just here.
Depicting the ship and the events surrounding is a costly 882.5-foot challenge, 269 meters if you're outside the US, to adapt onto the screen. In this video, besides the already mentioned, I'm going to primarily review 5 films, some made for the cinema, some for TV, and I'm going to start off light, with the 1943 Nazi propaganda flick, of all flicks, simply titled Titanic! But before that, honorable mention is due to the first Titanic talkie, Atlantic, which is very much a transitional piece between the sound and silent era. This film does its best to retell the factual details as they were reported. However, it is also very much a 1920s piece, filled largely with 1920s banter and sentiment, which almost feels like venting at times. Ignoring the laughingstock this picture was in England for the over-enunciated voiceovers,
there seem to be a great number of people, sir, wearing them in different ways.
Oh, ask the steward.
One thing that kept films at this time from being as investigative as they could were the censors. White Star Line was an esteemed and active business at the time, and their reputation made the topic of Titanic one to be avoided by media of the time, which is why the ship is named Atlantic rather than Titanic, for example. It was also feared that drawing too much attention about Titanic to the general public could make Britain look bad, especially to competing nations like Russia and Germany. So we do not get quite as much commentary as we would like, and faithful English adaptations wouldn't be made until after World War II. As opportunity would have it, during World War II, the Nazis took this caution and ran with it. I usually go into a film I've never seen before blind, doing my research afterwards. So when I first viewed the Nazi propaganda picture, many questions flared up within me. To be honest, I wasn't even sure if this was the notorious Nazi propaganda picture at all. I won't go too deep into the insanely wild story behind the making of this movie. There are creators that have done a good job of that, and I've linked 2 that have helped my own research in the description below. Briefly summarizing, in an attempt to get the German people to hate both the British and capitalism as a whole, characters and events were added and falsified. No, White Star Line stocks did not go down, since there were no stocks to be had at the time anyway. No, Ismay did not try to pay his way onto a lifeboat, and First Officer Herr Peterson and Bruce Ismay's wife Gloria didn't even exist. So why mention this movie at all? Well, despite it being an awful piece of Nazi propaganda garbage, the production quality and storytelling is actually pretty amazing. A big reason why I first questioned whether this was the piece of Nazi propaganda garbage at all. For the most part, I believed I was in 1912. There's also, dare I say, a really cute love story attached, and I actually found myself feeling for the characters. There were even points when I dared to ask if James Cameron was inspired by any part of this film's creative choices. Isn't that just too on the nose? Despite the monsters they tried to make these real people out to be, I was uncomfortably impressed by the set design, the acting, not to be confused with the script, and the overall production quality. The ship used was the SS Cap Arcona, which Hitler allowed use of for the film, a ship anything but Olympic class. But especially to those who know the Olympic class liners, the model they built was scary in its accuracy, except the stern section. What was up with that? The interior sets were probably done in both a sound studio and a large Edwardian hotel in Gdynia Pomorski, Poland, where a lot of the filming took place, according to IMDb. It is definitely a film worth watching for several different reasons, like the ones I mentioned. Upon first viewing the 1953 film starring Barbara Stanwyck, most notable for Double Indemnity, and Clifton Webb, who worked extensively in film and theatre, I wasn't as blown away as I thought I'd be despite a good script, accompanying story, top-notch acting, and production quality. For one, the pacing and character interaction felt strangely off. Could this be due to the editing, or perhaps the young and upcoming stars who didn't have a whole lot of experience in film? Maybe part of it had to do with the fact that it did not feel like 1912 to me. I'll go half and half on this one. In some ways, like in costuming, acting from mostly the older cast.
No, I mean the way I walked off without saying anything. It wasn't very adult of me, and I believe in being adult.
In some of the sets, it did an amazing job. And the start of the film, depicted on a foggy morning in Cherbourg, something I haven't seen any other movie do, set the tone very well. The movie was produced at a time when the 1950s was developing its identity, and this movie contributed. The youth act like youth of the time, and there's a very animated musical number that feels very out of place.
Twirl me to that Navajo rag.
And that's the impression I got from the sentimental, spoon-fed nature of some of the topics presented, feeling more like a representation than an interpretation, perhaps meant to comfort audiences' sentimentality and give them hope for a cold and uncertain atomic future, while lifting the spirits of a world still recovering from the wounds and scars of World War II. As the story progressed, though, the more compelling and heart-wrenching the pacing and storytelling became for me, with a heartwarming message of forgiveness and restoration, a very timeless theme. I even found myself crying at times. There were several explosions throughout scenes of the sinking that made me curious. This could have come from the account of survivors reporting hearing 4 explosions aboard as she was sinking. I gained a lot of respect for the film when I learned the spark of interest it brought back for the Titanic, which was fading into obscurity according to the DVD's commentary. There also wasn't a whole lot known about the facts, probably buried in the records of time that were fervently quieted by the British government and the White Star Line. Despite these limitations, the filmmakers partook in extensive research to get all the facts right. Also, I was charmed to see that James Cameron gave a little shout out to the 1953 film.
3 spades.
Double. Content. Why do the British find it necessary to announce dinner as if it were a cavalry charge?
Well, Jack, sounds like you're a good man to have around in a sticky spot. Why do they always insist on announcing dinner like a damn cavalry charge?
Speaking of James Cameron's film, it's at this time that I will directly compare the 1958 treasure A Night to Remember with the 1997 blockbuster Titanic because of how much alike they are and the lengths both films went for the sake of detail and accuracy. I think what makes both of these movies stand out so much is aided by the fact that they could be much more open and honest about the controversial topics presented. White Star Line had since merged with Cunard during the onslaught of the Great Depression, and fears of the disaster showing Britain in a bad light to opposing countries was as old and dusty as the imperialistic sensibility that prompted it. You could say that Titanic 1953 walked so that A Night to Remember could run. The film based very accurately on the even more detailed accounts written by Sir Walter Lord in 1955. Indeed, the 1950s would see a great revival for the fabled ship, and a cleaner, more linear line of facts and detail would rise to the surface, along with an organized rehabilitation effort for survivors. Now, if you were to ask me which of the two films I prefer, the 1997 film definitely holds a special place in my heart. It was a formative part in the very impressionable years of my childhood, as much as it helped define the later part of the 90s. And let's face it, it was meticulously crafted. The new information existing and the advanced technology available made these very refined updates possible. But the tropes of Hollywood is also very present, much like what we see in the 1953 film. A Night to Remember, however, was not produced by Hollywood, and the overly polished storytelling glam veneer is wiped clear off. Does this make it a better representation of the disaster and the people of the time? Not necessarily. Both celebrate the ship and the elegance of the time while not being afraid to make commentary about the social injustices of the time. And with that said, I don't think a depiction as accurate as it tries to be can escape being a product of the time in which it was produced. And most of the time, you are bound to get some of the viewpoints and opinions, larger life questions, and deeply rooted principles that evade the creator's mind and often become running tropes in everything they produce. Not that anyone was shy about acknowledging these facts. James Cameron and his fellow producers spoke very openly that the focus was on two individuals of different classes, a Romeo and Juliet on the high seas, if you will. And he speaks very openly in the audio commentary about the creative liberties he took. There's a rugged individualistic edge to the 1997 epic that is very indicative of the rugged 90s. Every movie focuses on class divide, but this one has an underlying theme of...
all life is a game of luck.
A real man makes his own luck, Archie.
I mean, I love waking up in the morning not knowing what's gonna happen or who I'm gonna meet, where I'm gonna wind up.
To making it count.
Make it count.
The score is even based on Irish, Celt, and folk music, which represents a lot of the struggling third-class passengers aboard. Actually, it's quite similar to the 1996 TV movie starring Catherine Zeta-Jones and Peter Gallagher, which I'll give honorable mention to shortly. A Night to Remember focuses on a broader range of individuals. You know, the people and events of the event presented. This doesn't mean that creators didn't have their own unique area of focus. Alcoholism, for example, is a theme that runs with some humor in the picture, with comedic actor George Rose playing the chief baker. The crass American disposition as viewed by the British, and what's a movie without romance? It is also very stiff and very British, very Edwardian British, that is, which I think is one of the greatest contrasts to the 1997 film and probably makes it more accurate to the Edwardian era, though one could argue that the 1997 film expands on the Edwardian era in a way the 1958 film does not. An unintended American perspective, if you will. For all the amazing accuracy A Night to Remember does to replicate the interior and exterior design of the ship, there are some modifications which the 1997 film was able to remedy. The launch scenes in A Night to Remember include both the 1938 Queen Elizabeth and Mauretania, as there was no footage of the Titanic's launch. Also, is that the Cap Arcona? In fact, is that footage taken directly from the 1943 Nazi propaganda film? Departure Day features the Berengaria. For a lot of the sinking scenes, they used a ship W.D. Ward was breaking up in Clydebank, Scotland, called the RMS Asturias, while lifeboats from Cunard's Franconia were provided. So the reason why the promenade windows are off in some scenes is because they used an actual ship and only had 10 days to shoot aboard said ship. I don't need to go into too much detail about how much James Cameron took from A Night to Remember, which really goes to show how pure of a piece that movie was to the events of the disaster, even 40 years after more information had been revealed. The 1997 epic also took certain liberties that not everyone was very happy with. While it won't frustrate us with the shallow criticisms, you know, what's the point, we already know the ship sinks in the end, and it's just a stupid love story, there are some very considerable criticisms. Speaking of representing a time period, author John Maxtone Graham expressed in an interview with Barry Vaudrin his dislike for the film because of how 1997 it felt, particularly Leonardo DiCaprio's representation of a young American lad from the Edwardian era.
Leonardo DiCaprio was a fine actor, and he just had no business being in that period or in that costume or in that era. He was so 1990.
Can I, bum a smoke?
Credit where credit is due, DiCaprio is said to have done a lot of research about the ship's 5 days at sea to prepare for his role. The depictions of Murdoch have also been given a lot of criticism from descendants of the family in particular, who say he would never pull a gun out on anyone and probably didn't shoot himself. James Cameron would later say that he regretted this decision and would change it if he could, though I can see why this issue is, if not something, of a historical gray area. Though I'd say it was definitely theoretically depicted in a very heavy-handed way that probably went too far. So let's talk about perspective. Through the personal experiences of Jack and Rose in Titanic 1997, the environment of the time period brings the viewer into a more personal relationship with the characters, as their trials and tribulations reflect the pride and prejudice, as well as the unique charms of the time. By giving the viewer their perspective, they can have a more personal connection with not just the characters, but the time itself. And it worked. This is what Hollywood did right, in my opinion. The now very iconic music is also very much seen as a positive, heightening our senses and bringing us into the hearts of the people in each given scenario. In contrast, by giving the viewer a more overall understanding of the disaster and the time period, and perhaps a very accurate look into the dry nature of the Edwardian sensibility, A Night to Remember resembles a journalistic news story. Of course, it's not without heart, a reflective heart from a generation of cast and crew very close to the time and the impacts of the disaster. One scene that was hauntingly impactful to me, for example, was when a family of third-class passengers rushed to the top decks only to happen upon the first-class restaurant. A still pause reigns as the reality of what they've never been able to reach and may never reach stares them straight in the face. The scene gets me every time. The hidden gem that is the 1996 TV miniseries is a TV miniseries from the 90s.
It's the 90s.
And caters to a broad TV audience, even over-explaining and overemphasizing themes and ideas. These things give it a so bad it's good quality. But it's good. I really admire the heart put into the production quality, which, to be perfectly honest, I wasn't expecting. It represents the time period. While it is wrought with historical inaccuracies, probably mostly perhaps due to a rushed deadline so as to beat the James Cameron epic, and with a very hammy script,
shout! Shout as loud as you possibly can! Come on!
Still gets me every time.
It was put together in a charming and passionate way, addressing many issues of the ship and her time period pretty well. Fun fact, this is the first film that shows the ship break in two. The 2012 miniseries was described by producer Nigel Stafford Clark in the commentary of episode 1 as a Charles Dickens novel transposed. A little soapy if you catch my drift. While the 1953 film was centered around a broken family dynamic and the 1997 epic A Forbidden Love Story, the miniseries follows many different characters, similar to A Night to Remember, though most of them are fictional, representative of their place in society. The tone is very London theatre. Some inaccuracies are more evident in some parts than others, like dancing in the first-class lounge, which didn't happen. One thing I admire is how the music is not too epic or pompous, and how the interior sets and locations are at least authentic to the time. There are also some stunning and creative measures taken to enhance the viewing experience. A commemorative representation that, according to the tones in the audio commentary, is not to be taken too seriously. For what it is, a lot of love was put into it, and a lot of golden nuggets of insight brought me to a better understanding about the time and the highly celebrated ship. Mike Brady of Oceanliner Designs devised a video investigating how accurately the movies depicted the ship splitting in two, and why the survivors of the night were split on the subject. It's another testament, in my opinion, to the 2012 miniseries, which brought us a fuzzier, more chaotic perspective of the incident, while the 1953 and 1996 depiction was far more representative and sentimental.
If you were on the ship, it was a rocket sled of a ride. It was a roller coaster.
And A Night to Remember and James Cameron's Titanic showed it with the same amount of grit and horror that must have conspired that cold and desperate night. But both had to have enough light to filter through the camera lens and allow we, the viewers, to see what was going on, something hard to get around. In reality, it probably looks something like this.
And watch the sinking again. You can see straight away how much more disorienting and confusing this would have been, that you're not looking so much at a ship sinking now, you're looking at just a black mass illuminated only by the stars behind it. And I think only the most astute of people would have picked up that, oh, this ship has broken in half. So what they were really hearing was the ship tearing itself apart. But in the pitch black, when you can't exactly see what's going on, you're sitting there interpreting this as, well, the ship's sinking in one piece.
And episode 4 of the 2012 miniseries helped me to see it directly from a survivor's point of view the entire way through.
Well, Francatelli, there goes that beautiful nightdress you were so proud of.
The amazing privilege of depicting an event in history as famous and talked about as Titanic is the endless amount of stories to tell, and each new narrative features the ship and the many walks of life that built, boarded, died, and survived the great ship in a way that helps us to learn new things, where the depictions are meant to be very accurate or to cater to the time and the audience in which it was presented. I felt like none of the pictures presented, even, dare I say, to some degree at least, the 1943 propaganda film, were a cash grab. Each one had heart and cared about the great ship. You know, for the most part. I got something new out of each and every depiction I watched. For a world so saturated with Titanic, I came to find that there is still so much to learn about everything surrounding Titanic. Even with so much Titanicization, the now untouchable remains of the ship retains a human presence, a curious longing for a chance to experience a time and a place we can only now reach in a fantasy novel. The past is a different place. They do things differently there. Here's the thing. I respect every single one of the movies presented in this video. Some are more meticulously crafted than others, but I'm not about to write a strongly worded review on IMDb or Rotten Tomatoes about any of them. Each are precious gems that give valuable insight into the iconic events that continue to touch people's hearts and lives on so many different levels. There are so many hidden stories we may not have even discovered yet, and I'm happy to continue welcoming new stories that rise to the surface, just like the pieces we've recovered from the wreck site in TV, film, and now social media. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing and pressing the like button if you enjoyed any part of it. Again, I am trying to get to 1,000 subscribers, and your support would warm me heart and put a smile on me face. It's free, and I promise you, you won't get any annoying spam emails by pressing it. I plan on uploading more video commentaries like this, as well as voyage videos where we sail aboard some of our favorite ocean liners, as well as ones that deserve more of our attention, quite frankly. Special thanks to Pacific Coast Sleep for sponsoring by commission this video. If you're on the lookout for a mattress, consider Pacific Coast Sleep. Using my name, Matthew S. Richards, or Adventure OC, you will receive 50% off your next purchase. Brands include M. Lily, the brand my mattress comes from. This 10-inch thick memory foam mattress with a cooling knit fabric cover keeps me cool on those hot Southern California nights. Bamboo charcoal memory foam offers pressure point relief and improves airflow and ventilation and fights odors. I may not get to experience a night in this Titanic suite, but I do get something that might arguably be better.